there's a segment from the recent CNN piece on Doug Wilson and Christchurch and the CREC and what's going on up in Moscow, Idaho, that has to do with the 19th Amendment. So if you have not seen the clip yet, I'm going to play it now. This is Pamela Brown from CNN interviewing Toby Sumpter and Jared Longshore, and she brings up the issue of the women's right to vote. So take a listen.
Wilson says in his vision of a Christian society, women as individuals shouldn't be able to vote. His fellow pastors, Jared Longshore and Toby Sumpter, agree.
In my ideal society, we would vote as households. And I would ordinarily be the one that would cast the vote, but I would cast the vote having discussed it with my household.
But what if there's your wife doesn't want to vote for the same person as you?
Right. Well, then that's a great opportunity for a good discussion.
There are some who have gone so far as to say that they want the 19th Amendment repealed.
I would support that. And I'd support it on the basis that the atomization that comes with our current system is not good for humans.
So that was a clip from the interview that Pamela Brown with CNN did, and there's more to the interview. Jared Longshore did say elsewhere that he was able to further explain his view on voting, and you even see it in that clip with Sumpter's comments that they're not arguing for male-only voting per se, but rather for head of household voting, which in some cases might be a woman if the husband is not in the home anymore. But I want to talk about voting briefly, and then women's voting as well. I think one of the reasons that clip and that response from Longshore is one of the more controversial ones, at least for most of CNN's listeners, is because of the high place that voting has taken in the American mind. Voting has become this sacrament. It's become this sacred duty. And children are taught this in the government schools from a young age, that you have the sacred duty to vote. And it's probably the most important thing you can do as an American is to get out there and vote. And that's why we're the freest nation in the world, because we can vote and all these things. And I would question that. I'll talk about the place of voting biblically in a moment. But I just want to point out that in the American system, voting has become the most important thing you can do. And I think it actually numbs us to the real problems, to the fact that we have set up a system that is contrary to Christ and his law. But we kind of numb ourselves to that by elevating the sacrament of voting to this place where, well, we have a responsibility. And you'll even hear pastors talk about it at election season. You know, Christians have this duty as Americans to vote in this sacred responsibility. And I question that. Now, our democratic, our republic, our three branches of government, the way it's set up, you do have this illusion of influence in voting. And so it is, I guess, important in that system. But I think it actually numbs us to the real problems with our system, because every election season, the appeal is, well, hey, just get out and vote harder. We just need to get more Christians to vote. We just need to get more people to vote for this guy, and that'll solve things. And never is it to question the actual system itself of voting for men to make laws in addition to God's law, and then voting for these people to staff and fund and enforce taxation in order to fund and staff these bureaucracies and enforce the man-made laws that they've made contrary to the Bible, and punish people for not paying for the enforcement of these man-made laws via their forced taxation, or for not following all these laws. That's the system that we're voting for. And as long as you get people, the American people in this case, to buy into that system and just say, well, I'm just going to keep voting for it. I'm just going to keep voting for a better version of the system, I think the pagans win. I think that's exactly what they want. As long as Christians are thinking, well, next time we'll just vote harder, I think that is a win for the statist system. So that's just a comment on voting. And I think it's interesting. You'll see the response and why people would be aghast that these people in Moscow want to take away the right of women to vote. That's such a shocking thing, because the right to vote in their mind is this incredible thing. And we have this wonderful republic where we can vote for people to tax us. And that's the other thing, like taxation without representation. It's kind of ridiculous. Like, hey, you can't steal from me unless I have the opportunity to vote for someone who will steal from me at a lesser rate. Like, taxation without representation, theft without representation, the supposed rallying cry of the American War for Independence is something we should really question. And many Americans were. Right after the War for Independence, there were many who said, wait a minute, we just fought a war over taxation, and now we are being our livelihood is being taxed here, and we do not support this. And many Americans don't even know about that right after the War for Independence, there was serious opposition to the new taxation being enforced by the legislators and by the leaders that were voted on by the American people. And anyway, that's a bit of a digression. But this idea of voting as this almost as a sacrament needs to be questioned by Christians. Now, there is a place for, I guess you could say, voting in biblical law. It is selecting men to be judges and to adjudicate between disputants. And I generally agree with the head of household voting, but that's not my main point here. My point is, I think even in this discussion, we're bearing the lead. We're missing the elephant in the room here when it comes to voting. Is the issue is not whether or not, we got to figure out, how to get the right people to vote for this man-made statist legislation that keeps spewing forth from DC. We should be asking, what are we even voting for? What is the role and responsibility of the one we vote for? And that is where my concern, for example, there's a lot about Doug Wilson I really appreciate, but that's an area where I would have concerns that he agrees with the American system, and so much of what he's arguing for is just a return to Americana, which had the dry rot already in it from the founding of this nation, the founding of a system that rejects Christ's law and sets man up as the lawmaker, and then gives people this illusion of freedom and control by saying, well, you can vote for, there's going to be no taxation without representation. There's going to be no oppression without you at least having the opportunity to vote for it. So yeah, I have the opportunity to vote. Everyone that's part of the major political parties is going to steal my money, so I can't vote for them. So yeah, I get to write in someone. So yeah, I guess I'm taxed and money is taken from me forcefully against my will, but I have representation because I get to vote. So I think that whole taxation without representation is another one of those religious dogmas in America, sort of akin to the sacrament of voting, that Americans accept unquestioningly, and I think we need to question that. But the real issue with voting is not who gets to vote. That's a good question. But the real question is, what is it that we're voting for, and how important is the voting? And in a biblical system, what you're actually choosing, and you're selecting men of character, not to promote policies and pork bills and make new laws, but to adjudicate between you and your neighbor when something comes up. Now, I will say, I generally agree that when women were given the right to vote in American history, we were already trending towards sort of a socialistic type of society where the government was involved in all these programs. And when women vote, they're naturally, generally speaking, going to vote more for the social programs, more for the government safety net, because they're more emotional. It's how they're wired. They're emotional. They want to care. They're nurturing people, which is a wonderful thing for women to be. Men are more logical when it comes to politics. What's the practical thing to do here? Neither of those things are right or wrong in their specific place. But when it comes to voting, when you have a system of voting that you have man-made legislation that leads to policies and programs that are funded by taking money from some people and using them to care for others, it's natural that women would support more of those programs, not because necessarily they are socialists themselves, but they want to help other people. Now, when you have the biblical system and the only thing you're actually voting for is people of character, it's less of a problem, I should say, to have, someone who's voting who would like potential safety nets, but realizes that's not the magistrate's role. So I'm going to vote for a godly magistrate who will adjudicate between disputants. Now, how that would happen and stuff is a bit of another discussion in terms of voting, but I do think there is a place for selecting leaders biblically. Look at Exodus 18, Deuteronomy 1. Select men who will rule in the fear of God. But their job was to adjudicate between disputants. They were the elders of the city. They were the judges. Disputes would be brought to them, and they would adjudicate. Our system is vote for people who will steal money from you and your neighbors, and now try to get people in there that are going to use that stolen money to benefit you. And that's the problem with our voting system. And until we address that, it's really a moot point, you know, whether or not women are voting or all those things. So once again, we're missing the main point here, and that is a microcosm of my overall critique, and it's a friendly critique of Doug Wilson, Longshore, and Sumpter, is that they're really pushing nothing they say would have been controversial in 1950s America, or pick your point in America. And to them, I think they're using that as kind of an argument in favor of their position. They're saying, well, hey, nothing we're saying here was that crazy in the past in America. And while I can agree with that, they need to go further, because there were things in Americana that were not biblical. So if you can go back to 1950 or 1920 or 1970 and say everything I'm promoting here today was accepted back then, I think you have a problem, because from especially since 1787, the Constitution, until today, there have been many, many things that are contrary to biblical law. So I would hope that there would be things that if you said, hey, this is what I want, and no, even in the 1950s, they weren't doing this. Even in the 1950s, we had forced taxation and legislation, and we had the seeds for everything we have now. So we have to take the axe to the root. The issue of voting and who votes is a bit of a distraction, but it's the perfect distraction, especially for the CNNs of the world, because they are the people that are continuing to push this idea of the sacrament of voting, and it's this sacred duty in our democracy, and you know, everyone needs to be able to vote because this is how we shape our nation, and it's super important. And I appreciate what Sumpter and Longshore are saying, but they're not really challenging that sacred idea in the pagan mind of we need to vote for our legislators to make laws for us. That needs to be challenged, and the biblical alternative needs to be put in its place, that the man-made legislative system is one of the main problems we have in this nation, and we don't need to fight for who's voting for making more laws. We need to address the issue of making of laws in the first place. So that's a bit on voting. All right, have a great day, and I'll have some more stuff for you guys later. And check out futureofchristendom.org. If you have not signed up for the conference here in Lancaster County, sign up. Tickets are going fast. I'd love to see you there. It's October 9th, 10th, and 11th in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. futureofchristendom.org. Check it out.